begin.
We are live.
Thank you very much. I want to welcome everyone, both committees, Appropriations and Ways and Means Committee, and the public to a really important, I think, briefing today that is very timely, very needed, which is to discuss with all of the stakeholders in our school system about the outlook for the plans for and the protections for our children as we begin to look at primary and secondary school reopening. It's a very timely topic. I think all of us, and this is, I will share only my view here, we're hoping that possibly COVID would be more behind us than it is. But nevertheless, what I do know is that here in Maryland, we, the legislature and the governor and all of our stakeholders have taken significant steps to make sure that when we reopen schools, which we want to do, that all our children will be as safe as possible. So I'm just very pleased today to have this briefing and to be online with the chair of Ways and Means. I want to welcome her, and I think it would be appropriate to say, we're happy you're here. We hope you're well. We send you love. And Chairwoman Kaiser, would you like to add anything to the opening remarks?
Just to thank you, Delegate McIntosh, for your words about the briefing today and your kind words as well, and so many of you on committees. Just really glad today that we get to hear from our new superintendent, Mohammed Chaudhary, and as well as from the public school superintendents, as well as the two unions representing our public school teachers. And I know that this is a topic high on everyone's mind, and just ready to get started. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And so with that, I think I'd like to welcome our new State Department of Education Superintendent. Are you online?
I am.
Is he on?
I can you hear?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm working at a deficit. Yeah, so I'm working at a deficit, but so you'll have to excuse me, but it is, Superintendent, it is fabulous to welcome you. These are the two committees on the House side that you will be interacting with quite a bit. And we are very happy to welcome you to Maryland and to welcome you to this committee hearing. And also, welcome you as the person I believe the board selected to be the architect, if not captain of a ship called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. But today we want to talk very specifically about your thoughts, your plans, your kind of view of how we are going to safely open our Maryland schools. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yep, that sounds good. Thank you. I believe someone was going to project my slides on your side, and then I was going to, there you go.
Yep, there we go.
Thank you. And whoever's controlling the slide, I will let you know. Sometimes I might say, go back to the previous slide. So just as a heads up. Thank you, Chair McIntosh, Chair Kaiser, and the other delegates. It was a pleasure to also meet some of you so far. I am in week 7, and so I'm looking forward to continue to engage. As I told, actually, I believe I told Chair Kaiser, I plan to get in trouble for engaging too much, and so you can hold me to that. And so that is just something that's very important to me. And so I'm looking forward to be able to share the work that the department is doing. This is a very important moment for our state and for our country to be able to get this right. And so we can jump right in. So, all right. So the first thing I want to just point out is, right, it's been a very difficult 18 months, the last year and a half. And so I just want to reaffirm that this department is committed to engaging our stakeholders religiously each and every day. That may have not been true at scale. I can't speak to the past, but this will be true going forward. And we will continue to build on the great work that has already been happening. A lot of great work is happening across my teams. And that is something that I will continue to engage in, and both in my calendar, there will be sacred days to engage authentically with our community and make sure that change is happening all across Maryland, especially our historically disadvantaged communities who have been left out of the table. This department will not be a department that bakes the cake and says, hey, what do you think? And we're only going to do some kind of pro forma checkbox engagement. That's not going to be okay with me. So if it ever feels like that, I do want you to let me know and call me out on that. One of the things I'm looking forward to doing is just engaging around the blueprint. I'm looking forward to doing not only a statewide survey, something I'm going to call blueprint workshops just throughout every corner of the state, and just hosting roundtable discussions with parents, students, activists, community members. It is very important to me to be able to do that. So I'm looking forward to doing that, both in person as well as virtually. And so just reaffirming our commitment to get this work right at this time. Next slide, please. So one of the first things to know is that we are returning back to full day 5 days a week in-person learning. That all school systems have stepped up to do that, as well as we know that the Delta variant is very real and strong, and people have fears that are arising again, but that's not going to stop us from not having our schools open. And that is very important to know that. I'm coming from a state where I didn't have leadership out of Austin. And so we had to figure it out at a 90% Title I district. And we had more than 70% of our kids back in person, and we didn't close a single school. It is possible with, very strong mitigation strategies as well as support and resources. So all school systems will be open 5 days a week in person. And that is something that we're going into. And so you're going to hear how the summer has been, because this has been an unprecedented summer in terms of student participation in learning. And so we'll talk about that as well. Next slide. In terms of what the guidance is right now out there, right? MDH and my department came together to issue guidance in July to basically say we strongly recommend that all individuals who are not fully vaccinated wear masks, and then we also strongly recommend get the vaccine. And so that is what the guidance is out right now. And then in addition to the guidance, you'll see towards the tail end of the guidance, we have like different scenarios. So school systems have a foundation to like what happens when a student tests positive, or what happens if a staff member who is not vaccinated and students get sick, what to do next. So we're looking at that guidance every day, as well as what we need to refine. For me, one of the things that's important is just being able to have tabletop exercises. So being able to understand, like, if this happens, then do X, Y, and Z, rather than just go ahead and do something more, how I would say, irrational, where it leads to closing a school. We cannot do that. You may have seen nationally, 800 students were quarantined recently in Arkansas. They didn't have a plan in terms of how to do contact tracing well. And so, and there's no reason why the learning of that many students should have been disrupted, as well as closing the school. So it's just very important to our department and the governor's office that there is a strong playbook in place to be able to do this well. So that is what the current guidance reads and says. And so I just wanted to share that as well. Going off to the next slide, please. Specifically, one of the things I want to do is really level setting around what we mean by learning loss and what we're recovering to, because there's a lot of conversation around this. I shared this with my board during our first board meeting, and my first board meeting is, we're recovering learning loss, we're recovering all the learning loss that has happened. It's very, very important to know what we mean by that. And also, what was learning like in 2019 before COVID hit? What did that look like? When you look at the data in 2019, before COVID hit, Maryland, in terms of a student moving through our school system, how many students actually reach proficiency while moving from, say, third grade to fourth grade to fifth grade. I've also looked at this data from kindergarten all the way up to third grade, and I've also looked at this data as well as in other grades. Only about roughly 20% of students reach proficiency, both in reading and math. So just to give you a sense of, as we talk about learning and acceleration, what that looked like before. So what we were doing before is not going to be enough, right? We're going to have to really reassess what we were doing before, coupled with the additional resources coming from the blueprint as well as federal funds. In addition to that, right, there's other things that we were also not really paying attention to, right? When it came to the social emotional health of our students, right? We are doubling down, we are tripling down on that. And we know that has a huge impact on how well students learn. And so that is something that is, I think, that very unique at this time that the blueprint recognized as well as our federal funds. Next slide, please. So just wanted to share this data with you. So here's an example, not an example, a real example of our third grade cohort of students prior to the pandemic who were not proficient. And then, you know, they went through their education, right? And they went through fourth grade and fifth grade. So third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. 3 years later, where are they? So as I said, not a lot of students cross the proficiency line when you think about where students are moving towards from grade to grade. This is pre-pandemic. And the other thing that's a bit sobering is we actually have students who lose proficiency. So if you look at third grade to fifth grade, there are students who actually lost proficiency in English language arts. Next slide, please. So in math, same story, right? In math, you see 108,000 students roughly who are not proficient. And then, you know, 3 years later, where are they? And as you can see that the vast majority are still not proficient at that grade level where they moved. And then only a small percentage reach that. And then again, there's another percentage of kids who lose proficiency. So in a sense, it's canceling out. So I point to this because it's important to look at what learning and acceleration look like prior to the pandemic. And so if the idea is to recover, right, what are we recovering to? It's important to understand that, because just doing things the way it was done before or returning to normal is not going to be good enough. Next slide, please. In terms of the charge to school systems, right, our first road to recovery, right, road to recovery is summer school. And so House Bill 1372 of 2021 required school systems to really go deep in the summer school experience, right, provide summer programs to students across all grade levels, include instruction in reading and math, prioritize enrollment of students who are the COVID-19 disruption has impacted the most, ensure that there is transportation and meals provided, ensure that there is also enrichment, because it's not just about reading and math, it's also about re-engaging our students and reminding them. For some students, this is their experience with school for the first time, even though they were about to start school because of the disruption, right? And then also evaluating the effectiveness of it. So just a reminder on, like, there's a lot of overlap between the blueprint as well as the funds coming in from the state, as well as what the federal expectations are in terms of working with those funds. Going to the next slide, please. I wanted to share some examples of school systems that are currently, taking part in various summer programming. So here's an example from Washington County. As you can see, they offered it to about 6,400 students. Not everyone showed up. As the numbers as of today is about a little over 5,000 students are participating. And then for them, this is the summer that they have had the most students participate ever. Every superintendent I've spoken to, they said, this is the summer we've had the most kids in terms of how summer school has gone before. Roughly around the state, there's about 140,000 students participating in summer school based on our current data that we have in hand. And as you can see, they provide acceleration opportunities as well as enrichment opportunities as well. Next example, please, next slide. This is Wicomico County. As you can see, again, providing remediation, acceleration, and credit recovery, but they also have programming around transition, because there are many students, especially at the early grades, that are transitioning to school, specifically in-person schooling, right? So that alone is not something that should be taken for granted, right? Very different in starting school at home in front of a computer versus what it's going to be like in person. So they have about a little over 2,000 students. Again, the most students that they've ever had participating marketing compared to previous years. But the example I share here is that they also have programming around transition, right? Also similar to the other example where they have credit recovery and acceleration opportunities in core subjects. Next example, please. Next slide. Howard County, again, offering acceleration opportunities for students. But the unique piece that I wanted to share about Howard County, they're also providing compensatory services for our special education students. They offered that to about 1,600 students. They have over 4,000 students participating in the school system. So when it comes to summer school being open to all students, that is exactly what is happening, right? Not just students who are behind, it is also about students who are transitioning into a new grade level, to students who have IEPs, because there were services that just did not happen during the spring. And so being able to provide compensatory services starting as early as the summer is going to be very important and all throughout the school year. Next slide, please. Let's talk about our ARP plan, our American Rescue Plan. So one of the things that we made sure that was very important was engaging around what we ultimately invest our plan around. And we recently submitted it to the US Department of Ed. We also published a report around our engagement that we've done. You can access that on the website. And essentially we landed on 3 things. And the 3 things we landed on was accelerating student engagement, supporting mental and social and emotional health, and addressing disrupted education. We engaged our stakeholders around this, we engaged school systems around this, and these were 3 things that really did ring true around investing in our remaining set of funds and really leaning in on this. And so the plans that we are getting from school systems leading up to the launch of the school is going to be anchored around these 3 things. Of course, they will all be doing very different things, but it will be anchored around these 3 things in terms of our priorities of our ARP plan. So I wanted to talk about some of those examples of related to these 3 buckets. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in Frederick County, accelerating student achievement, which is priority number 1, they launched something called Elevate Academy, and it's really focused on helping students re-engage and reacclimate with the educational experience. You know, again, some students are experiencing in-person school for the first time. Some, you know, it's just about re-engaging in what school felt like and what it's like to be in school, especially in person. It's a 20-day program. All 60 of their comprehensive schools, including their CTE center, had this offering. And one of the things to look at, as you can see in the bottom, right, they not only offered academic support and credit recovery, but there were also field trips and books that were given away and other social emotional support. So it was really a comprehensive program in order to reacclimate and bring students back into the educational experiences. So that is an example of what one county is doing around the priority of accelerating student engagement. Next slide, please. So supporting student mental and social emotional health. Here's an example from Dorchester County. So one of the things that they have decided to invest in is provide therapeutic support in classrooms and hiring additional school counselors. And as you can see, they are doing a wide variety of things around how they are engaging students around developing and meeting their social emotional needs. Yoga, art therapy, small group meetings about anxiety, depression, social skills, grief counseling, one-to-one pull-out counseling sessions. So these things this is what they will be committing to with their federal dollars in terms of as they go into the next school year. So this is one example of one of our school systems in meeting the social emotional health priority of our ARP plan. Next slide, please. And addressing disrupted instruction. So in Anne Arundel, they have really leaned in leveraging their community partners to be able to really provide a fun and exciting and engaging student experience and really leverage a community, right? It takes a village to get this right. And so as you can see, they have launched a wide variety of programming that they're calling Summer Engage, Inspire. And one of the things Superintendent Orlado told me is like, we didn't want it to call it summer school. We wanted to call it summer camp. We wanted to call it summer enrichment. And that alone, just the language alone just shifted the perceptions for some folks. And they had wait lists where, because they had only so many programs and slots to offer, there were some, parents who were not happy because they couldn't get into every single program that they wanted to get into. And then again, they're leveraging their partners, as you can see the partners listed on there, in terms of being able to offer a wide variety of educational experience, focus on mitigating and accelerating student learning going into the next school year. And this is something that will continue all throughout the school year because this is their plan for this coming school year. Next slide, please. Let's talk about virtual learning. And so I wanted to just give a spotlight on what virtual learning is going to look like going into next school year. Only about 1 to 2% of our student population is going to be participating virtual. Now, this number is a moving target of sorts, right? Many school systems prior to this Delta variant moment had many parents sign up and then also back out and say, I actually want in-person instead. Right now, we're kind of seeing in some regions of our state where parents are saying, I actually want the virtual option. And so rightfully so for some parents, given the concerns around the Delta variant. Overall, you can see about 13,000 students are going to be participating in virtual learning experiences. 22 out of our 24 school systems are offering a virtual option. And an example from one system is they're offering something both all the way from K all the way up to 12. Now the programming looks different from K to 5 versus what it would look like in the 6-12 experience. And I'll talk about some more examples as well. But this just gives you just a high level snapshot in terms of what the numbers look like. What is the percent of students? And universally in my discussions with the school system and my team's engagement with them, it's about 1 to 2% of their population participating in virtual programming going into the next school year. Let's go on to the next slide to talk about some examples. Before I go on to the next, some examples, I wanted to talk about the requirements, right? The components in terms of because the plans needed to be submitted to us and we had to approve them. And so one of the things that the state has had for a long time is program requirements around what virtual instruction to look like. And they're good requirements. They're strong requirements. And so we use that as like a baseline rubric in approving the virtual plan. So as you can see, they have to be aligned with our state standards, right? Educators have to be certified to teach in Maryland, right? They have to also do evaluations of their program. So if you're going to do virtual learning experience, you also have to commit to evaluating its effectiveness. And of course, making sure that required services and such are followed that are aligned to IDEA. So we used these program requirements that existed prior to even the pandemic to be able to have a baseline rubric in order to approve plans. And as I said, they are very strong guardrails to be ensured that the plans are strong, virtual plans are strong going into next school year. Next slide, please. We also provided a lot of technical assistance leading up to the submission of their plans. We not only said, your plans are due at this time, but we also made sure that we were supporting our school systems throughout the development of their plans. And so Dr. Williamson and her team worked very closely in our teaching and learning division to be able to support school systems with whatever resources and plans they had. So leading up to submission, it wasn't a surprise in terms of whether or not, their plans were completely off or if are aligned to what we were looking for, and there's no reason for us to constantly engage with our school systems to be able to ensure that their plans are strong and not be a surprise after they submit to us to say, hey, you missed the mark completely on this application. So just to give you a set of examples of the things that we do and as these plans were submitted to us. Going on to the next slide, please. So here's what we know about virtual instruction. So in terms of the students that succeed, nationally, it is very clear from the research, and I'm coming from a state where there are a lot of virtual offerings. Disproportionately, they're not good. They don't get it done when it comes to student achievement. At scale, virtual programming has not been good for learning. However, there are examples where it works for some families and students. And what we know from the research is there are a few different elements at play in terms of when it works. It works well with students who are, more self-disciplined and independent learners, right? There's a strong foundation in terms of effective communication foundation in terms of reading and writing and willing to ask for help. So being able to have stronger social and emotional learning competencies, being able to drive your learning. Another piece around it is being able to just have, a strong foundation in terms of technology and access. That matters as well. And then of course, interest. But all of these things, right, do come into play. Another piece that just not mentioned here, socioeconomics also comes into play as well. That's not true universally, but that does come into play. I will give you an example. When I was in San Antonio, when some of our families were virtual learning, some of our more middle-class families hired a college tutor to hang out with them right next to them while they were doing virtual learning. Well, that's very different. That's a one-to-one tutor, right, that someone is able to bring on. That's not something you can do for all students, because if I could do that, guarantee that for all students, that would be amazing. But those students were successful in virtual learning, but they also had a coach right next to them to support them throughout it. So to just give you a sense of what we know about virtual learning. Next slide, please. In terms of learning loss and what we can expect to see, we pushed our state assessment to the fall, and we're giving a shortened test in reading and math, and that's coming up this fall. But we have national data. There are school systems that did give testing in the spring, and then we have studies from school systems who utilize something like MAP and WA, as well as other learning programs that are used nationally. And what we have seen is that it has really impacted student learning, disproportionately our historically disadvantaged students. And I'm going to provide some examples of what that looks like nationally from some states, but the range has been between 50 and 90% lower from what the baselines were in 2019. So that has been coming out more and more now that we're getting data. And so I'm telling everyone, as we take our fall assessment, just embrace the baselines, embrace the new baselines, and let's get to work. I mean, that's what it is. And there are already historical opportunity and achievement gaps in our state. We have some of the widest. It's only going to be wider, and we're going to see that. And in the summer, as I said, about 140,000 students, which is a lot of kids, but it's not 900,000 students in terms of that got to experience learning. And not all of our historically disadvantaged subgroups were able to participate at scale. Next slide, please. Let's talk about what it looks like nationally, so you can kind of get a sense of with real numbers. So Texas and Indiana both gave their assessment in the spring. They chose not to seek the waiver and push it down to the fall. And so in Texas, 5 years of progress has been wiped out or completely set back. Like in algebra, right? The Texas was more than 60% of its students were proficient in algebra in 2019. Today, it's 41%. And by the way, Texas had 98% participation rate in its assessment. So if people are asking like, oh, well, maybe only some kids took the assessment. No, they had a high participation rate. Same thing with Indiana, who gave their spring assessment in math and English. Again, about 40% of its students were proficient about roughly in 2019, and today it's 28.6. I'm going to give you another view of this. Let's go to the next slide. So as you can see, here's Texas, right? So as you can see, years of progress, right? Look at that algebra, right? Years of progress in math and reading and algebra, right? And then now with the pandemic, a year and a half, it's basically set the state back in terms of where their new baselines are. I mean, it took the pandemic essentially wiped out those gains and then some. And so this is something I'm just sharing so folks understand like what our new baselines most likely will be. And our early data that we collected throughout the spring, throughout last school year, do indicate that we're headed there as well. So just to give a sense of what progress and what COVID-19 has done in terms of student achievement. Next slide, please. Here are the guardrails that are very important to virtual learning. And then so as we approve these plans, we also made sure we looked for these things as well. So we had the program requirements that the state law had dictated, but we also added additional elements to the rubric as we approve state plans. So one, making sure that you are evaluating and assessing student attendance. You are making sure you are having meaningful markers in place and interventions in place that students are engaged with with learning, right? And it's not simply just logging in once and that counts as attendance. That's very important. That's something I told the team, like, it can't just be, someone logged in and that just counts that they're here, right? You have to actually have, did they turn in assignments, right? What are they experiencing instruction in a synchronous manner? And how often are they experiencing synchronous instruction? Providing face-to-face tutoring sessions when it's appropriate. As much as possible, there is unprecedented funding, both from the federal and the blueprint, to be able to do this. And whether it's the virtual setting or in person, there should be opportunities to be able to do small group instruction at the greatest level possible. Assigning mentors to assist with time management organization. Remember that example I gave you in San Antonio, what some of our parents did? As much as possible, if school systems can design those kind of experience for our students, would go a long way. And then also establishing a virtual help desk and training sessions for parents, because there's going to be tech issues. We all experience this all the time. So, and it shouldn't be hard to get in touch with someone to help be able to, log in or deal with some kind of issue that is enable them to engage with the virtual learning programming. Next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to share is, I know this was a question thrown out, and so leading up to this presentation is what we are doing around community schools, because we know our high poverty schools not only have to do this well, but also meet the wraparound needs of our students. And so, as you can see, we have begun to start giving the concentration of poverty grants that enable our schools to begin to hire a community schools coordinator and start taking part in the needs assessment. The department has hired a community schools director. And so that community schools director is engaged with our first cohort of schools going through this process. And as we go out to the outer fiscal years, we will continue to make sure that this is implemented well. And so this is absolutely crucial, right? We don't want our teachers also becoming social workers. We want our teachers to teach and be able to have a reliable network of wraparound services that they can refer our students to, so that need can be met while also their instruction, their learning goals as well. So just wanted to give a snapshot of where we are with this. The department has been supporting with the need assessments and also developing tools to be able to ensure that people do this well with implementation and such. Next slide, please. I think the only other thing that I have that I want to share is the piece that to remember in all of this is that we are going to be assessing this all throughout this process, meaning that I recently invested in my research department to be able to ensure that every 9 weeks that we are engaging with our school systems. I'm coming from a state that had 1,100 districts. There are 24 here. There is no reason why we should not be able to engage as the State Department of Ed, knowing what is happening in our school system and supporting and leading. And so I am going to be redesigning this department to be highly responsive and highly active. I told the superintendents, I had lunch with the PAZAM group recently. I said, you can't just use local control against me, right? Like, I'm gonna wanna know how you're doing. I'm gonna wanna know. The blueprint legislation is not about local control. It's about best practices. It's about doing this well at scale. So I just want to stress that this is something that the MSDE will be redesigned to ensure that it's a highly responsive and engaging organization, and best practices are scaling left and right every day. And so with that, I will take any and all questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, those of you who have questions, if you can raise your hand online, you should pop up your little yellow hand. Aha. I see a couple from my committee, Chairwoman Kaiser, so I'll go first and then we can alternate. Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Chaudhary, thank you for that presentation. It was very insightful. I have a quick question. When you were talking about the requirements for teachers, can you clarify the teacher requirements for virtual learning that you referenced?
Yeah, so one, they have to be certified to teach in Maryland. So that is important. That's actually in state law that's been around. And then in addition to that, right, they have to go through extensive training and be part of even though they are the virtual teacher, that doesn't change them from not being part of the professional learning community of the reading department or the math department. None of that changes. Now, some of our school systems have chosen to work with a vendor, right?
Okay, that was my next question. Were they
Yeah.
public school employees or not?
Yeah, so the Eastern Shore has decided to come together and create what is called the Eastern Shore Consortium, right? And it's basically they're partnering with a vendor to provide virtual learning. They're all participating in it. Now, the students are still enrolled at their school. They're not being enrolled in some kind of standalone virtual academy. They're still connected to their school and get services from the school and such. But in terms of, this is specifically for 612, the instruction is with a vendor educator. And so that is something that's unique with their model. And some of them are also doing a K-12 model, but that's using their own educators. We will be looking at that one closely. I have told the Eastern Shore Consortium, because at scale, when you look at models with vendor driven instruction, it doesn't have a great track record. So it is very important that this is done well, but this is something that they wanted to pilot. And I do believe in smart pilots. And so that's something that they are invested in doing, but we'll see how it goes. And like I said, only about 1 to 2% of their school system population is participating in it. Like, for example, in Frederick County, which is part of it, not Frederick County, Kent County, which is part of it, they are not, they don't have any kids who are participating in that in their 612, but some are, yeah.
I appreciate the tracking that. Thank you.
Right. Delegate Barnes?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and it's good to see you. Welcome back. Dr. Chowdhury, I just had one question. I wanted to, if you can elaborate on slide 4, where you were talking about face coverings. We know, especially here in Prince George's County, that is a huge concern for our students coming back and looking at what are some of the guidelines for just that. A lot of our schools are old, so the ventilation system is not as great as that we would like. So is there a rotation in which students can leave the building and take off their mask, or can you just elaborate on the face covering guidelines?
Yeah, so the guideline simply says, align with the CDC, right? A mask in school settings, highly recommend that you do this. It's not a mandate, but it is like you should mask up to the greatest extent possible. And you should have layered mitigation strategies spread out through the day. So make sure you maximize students' ability to, be outside, right? Get fresh air, be able to make sure the spacing is still done well to the greatest extent possible. All of those things are written into the guidelines. Now, in the ground, it does look different, right? Because the school buildings were built without some of them with ventilation in mind. Ventilation should have been a cool word when we first built the first school ever, but it is now a word that everyone is, very focused on. Now, they can use all of their federal funds if they wanted to. Only 20% actually has to be used to tackle student learning. The other 80 they can use for different things. They can use to, upgrade their HVAC systems, right? Buy, HEPA filters, do all of those kinds of things to be able to promote a greater ventilation. Now, some of that stuff is limited by the design of the school, right? And so I know there's going to be a massive project to really do a facility condition index of our school, and so that is happening, which is really great. I learned that from Chair McIntosh. But that's, you're not going to tackle that overnight, right? Like you got to make up for legacies of neglect, and I can tell you in San Antonio, we have a 2030 plan to touch all of our buildings. But in the meantime, we have done everything we can to open up windows and do all of that to be able to do. So the guidance says, do all these types of things. But at the end of the day, how they execute it, I think will be different, right? And so to the greatest extent possible, my hope is people are able to promote ventilation each and every day, but I know some will be limited in terms of what they can do.
Thank you very much.
And I might mention also, Delegate Barnes, in the state budget that we just passed, we set aside $80 million more out of the federal money that came in from the Biden administration and from our congressional delegation for our schools in Maryland to use for ventilation and other issues. So that we've value added to existing programs, and we hope that that has a large impact on these schools.
Thank you.
Delegate Solomon, you're welcome. Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Superintendent, welcome. Welcome to Maryland. You have already been a breath of fresh air. Really appreciate your presentation and really looking forward to working with you on MSD's budget going forward. Thank you to both chairs for convening today's hearing, and Mr. Superintendent, I have to say I'm really excited to work with you on childcare, and I know our committee sent a letter over to you and excited to dig into that. My question, particularly on this issue, just goes to, and I know you touched on it a little bit, and I know from your remarks at the last school board meeting, it's something that you're incredibly passionate about, is around ESOL students and our immigrant students who are coming to the system. The district that I represent, we have a lot of those students. And, my big concern is that, especially for students whose families are undocumented, who weren't eligible for a lot of the federal aid that came down during COVID, that's something we addressed, at least at the state level, but we know a lot of students dropped out of school because they were trying to figure out how to get a job, help their families make ends meet. And these are students primarily in high school who, once they sort of get a taste of the work world, or their job may be the reason that their family's staying in their home or sees food on their table, they're not necessarily going to go back, especially if, they're already behind and they've got to catch up a couple of years. And so that's sort of the population I think that I'm most concerned with. And just curious, what kind of data MSDE has or is digging into how you're going to hold our school systems accountable. And again, just incredibly appreciative of your comments, because I think that's clearly going to be a laser focus for you all, but was just hoping you could comment on that.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I have to do as part of the blueprint, there's a few things I have to do, and that I'm most excited about is convene an EL work group that basically, Delegate Alonzo Washington is on it. I know this is an area that he's very passionate about, and basically recommend and publish a report on how we can better service our English language learners. I am coming from districts where they were 40% or 50%, and I know they can thrive. I know they can do really well. I mean, you can look at schools in the Rio Grande Valley, like they can thrive. In fact, our English language learners who have gone through dual language programming are reaching proficiency rates at higher and also going to and through college. I know it can happen, and Maryland needs to know that. It's not a mystery on how to educate English language learners. I'm sorry. I know the numbers are still growing, but it's not a mystery. So one of the I will personally be chairing that Yale work group. I'm not putting a representative from my staff, and it's very important. I started as an ESL teacher in middle school in Los Angeles. I do have a chip on my shoulder on how to do this well. And we have some very strong people that I make sure both not only from our local universities, but also national. I have a former deputy assistant secretary whose job was to basically take care of, look at this issue nationally. Her name is Libya Gill. She will be sitting on this as well. So we will be looking at, so that's one. I will be bringing this to the AIB, and I will be saying you need to do this, and it would be foolish not to do this. And so that's one piece. The other piece around students and being able to bring them back and re-engage them. It really takes lots of engagement. It really takes I'm coming from San Antonio, and I can tell you, many of our students who were eligible for college and choosing instead to go to the work world. And it's something that drove my superintendent crazy. I mean, his name is Pedro Martinez. He came to this country in Chicago when he was 13. It was personal to him to be able to, get our students to college. He drove some of our CTE folks crazy, because he had a more bias towards college. And worked really hard. It is truly a 2-generation approach. You have to, like we did everything from, we would take the family and have them visit the college, and we funded that experience, and we would talk about what that's like and what the support pieces are, right? We put a college-bound advisor in every single comprehensive high school whose job was to essentially support cohorts of kids to and through college and provide that counseling. We usually stop. We usually say, hey, you know what? We'll go ahead and pass it on to higher ed, and higher ed will take the next part. We just told ourselves, no, higher ed has not gotten their act together yet on this, so we'll do it ourselves. So this department will be promoting strategies like that. It's a population we need to get right. I know they can thrive. I've seen it. I mean, it's not something I'm making up. So that's what we will be doing. And hopefully, the policy conditions that come out of Annapolis support best practices at scale.
I think you'll have some able partners here. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Cram.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good to see you and see Chair Kaiser today. And welcome to you, Superintendent. Good to see you. So I'm a positive person. I hope we have a great school year coming at us, but I also want to know if the metrics, if the COVID metrics get out of hand, are the local LEAs, are they authorized to make a decision about going to virtual learning if necessary, total virtual learning?
So right now, there is actually nothing that both stands in the way and against that or says you can't do that. So there isn't anything that exists. I mean, the board did a resolution to say, hey, we need to reopen, right? But in terms of something that says you can't just go to turtle, there's nothing that exists that would block someone from there. Now, I will say, Delegate, coming from a 90% Title I district who had 70% of its kids back in August of 2020 and did not close a single school and had a 1% positivity rate in terms of what our schools look like. We did contact tracing, we had to do this because we didn't have leadership around this like Maryland had. And so I would hope there's no scenarios where a single school in Maryland has to close because of what we know about virtual learning. However, if you're saying, is there anything that would block that? There's nothing that exists right now to block it. I just don't see why that would need to happen personally, and just with the supports and everything. And I would hope that does not happen at all, but there's nothing that would block that.
Delegate
Thank you to both Madam Chairs, and congratulations on your new position there, Doctor. Really appreciate the enthusiasm going into all this, because we do have such so many circumstances against us right now. As a parent, having a child who just graduated from the school system and served on the educational subcommittee, one of the things that we've noticed, and I'll touch on that you spoke about your local jurisdictions, the county jurisdictions, is some school boards are more engaged with others when it comes to legislation coming down to Annapolis. And, I can't speak for all the jurisdictions, but historically it's been mostly a sort of top down, which is to say policy originates in Annapolis. It's given to these other jurisdictions and they sort of implement it. And sometimes really good ideas, innovative processes, some of the things you touched on in the other counties can kind of go up from the bottom. So, if you could just touch a little bit more on how you personally are going to interact with our local elected school boards, because that really excites me, jurisdictions that are especially on the Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, I found that to be very exciting.
Yes. One of the many jobs I've held is being the Chief Innovation Officer of Dallas ISD and San Antonio. So in terms of, finding the right balance between smart levels of autonomy, so you can allow smart pilots and new ideas to come about while also ensuring that you are rooted in best practices based on decades of research is not something foreign to me. So, you know, I am known for driving my CFOs and my legal departments crazy because I have had, you know, big ideas to be able to get it right for kids. So to me, this work is bottom up, right, with the right set of guardrails for accountability that are coming right from both policy as and the state board, where people are accountable for results for kids. You know, I don't want to be in the dark about how kids are doing. I want my time and era to be defined by closing achievement and opportunity gaps. You know, every state education agency chief, and I am connected to a national network of folks who are doing this work. They're like, we just have federal funds. You have federal funds and blueprint. Your state said that it wants to commit to this. So there is no reason why we should not be able to figure this. So I look forward to promoting when I have, you know, funding that I can use to pilot or scale or reinforce best practices, it will be designed with bottom-up innovation in mind. However, I always say the smart set of autonomies, like I always say, you should not be able to just experiment on something that we know from decades of research is not going to work or has not worked. And so that's very important to me as well. So, you know, I'm very passionate about that. And so that's how I plan to work. It's not top down, it's every single direction, but it's also not leave us alone, local control. We'll do what we want with our English language learners. No, that's not how that works. So that matters to me as well. And I'm obligated, right? Both as someone who you entrust to expend blueprint funding as well as federal funding. So all of those pieces I will take very personally as the department to be able to handle as well. So.
Great, and thanks, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Delegate Smith.
Is that
Valentina.
okay? I know there are two of us. Thank you, Madam Chair and Chairwoman Kaiser and Superintendent Chaudhry. On slide 12, you talked about the report that was submitted to the U.S. Department of Education and the priorities. And one of them is the supporting mental, social, and emotional health. And so going forward, I know you talked a lot of focus on, you know, the summer learning and what was happening in the local school programs and what you anticipate for virtual learning. But I know today is, you know, limited, but if you could keep us posted on how the locals are really prioritizing or having available to them what they need for the mental and physical wellness of the students. In particular, prior to you coming, there were some difficulties with local school jurisdictions getting telemedicine through and approved by the different local health school departments in the local schools and all. And so I guess what I'm really searching for is in the future, you may be updating us or giving us information to make sure there's access to, or what your barriers are to mental and physical health. It's obviously something we focused on in the blueprint too.
Absolutely. Standing item, because I'm redesigning our board agenda on a monthly basis, because one of the standing items will be on how the state is approaching and tackling social emotional learning. And so I want to be able to both highlight what's happening across all 24 systems, but also what our problems of practice are and what the department is doing to be able to break barriers to do that well. So that will be a standing item every month. I'll be on live television for that, but I'm happy to also come back and talk to you about that on a regular basis. Yeah.
Thank you, especially if you're having shortages in access to what you need for mental health. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I do not see any other questions. Is that correct, Madam Chair? Okay. We want to thank you. This has been a wonderful first meeting of the two committees with you. We hope to see you, and I'm sure we'll see you more as the schools open to the fall and as we begin to approach the next budget year. But thank you so much and welcome to Maryland. We're very happy to have you.
Thank you so much,
Very happy to have you.
Chair McIntosh, Chair Kaiser, thank you. I'm looking forward to engaging. As I said, I'm gonna get in trouble for engaging too much, so warning. so I appreciate that.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Thank
so
you.
much. All right.
We're now going to turn to our Public School Superintendents Association of Maryland, who have with us today Dr. Sean Bolson of Harford County, the superintendent of schools there that we're going to hear from with a presentation again with the focus on how they and we intend to open our schools safely for our children. We want to welcome you.
Well, good afternoon and thank you. So I believe Superintendent Chaudhary hit a lot of my talking points, so I'll do my best to be additive, not repetitive. Thank you, Chairs McIntosh and Kaiser, for the invitation. And I did also want to take a moment to welcome again Superintendent Chaudhary. We've begun collaborating with him, as he indicated. He met with superintendents last week, and we're really looking forward to that work. And I think if I were to highlight anything that's sort of similar across his presentation and ours is when he indicated the three broad areas of the ARP plan: accelerating engagement, supporting mental, social, and emotional health, and addressing disrupted education. I think as you hear some of the examples, and you heard many from him, of the work going on both in summer school and ongoing efforts from the school districts, that we really are focused and prioritizing those three areas. They're the work we need to do. So Pazan was asked today to speak on the topics of how school systems are using their federal funds, particularly how they're using them to support summer school, and also how some of that work will inform what we do for return in the fall. And so it is my understanding, and you heard from Superintendent Chaudhary, that every school district is planning to return fully in person in the fall. That we do have a very small number of students looking at virtual learning. However, it's a small number, and I'm going to touch on that very briefly. So with regard to federal funds, as we polled the other school systems, and I'm going to speak specifically from the Harford County Public Schools perspective. When you look at our federal money, I think it really fell into a number of broad buckets. One was academic intervention. This includes the ongoing interventions in the school systems, but also summer schools we've spoken about, and after school activities, ongoing tutoring, those sorts of things. Then of course, technology, I'll speak about that in a moment, health and safety, virtual instruction, again, I'll come back to that in just a moment also. And then I want to close with mental health before I talk more about summer school. On the topic of technology, I would argue that while a lot of us use technology in the early federal funds, that this in many ways produced our largest equity leap forward, because we were behind in one-to-one. And now I would argue that most students in this state have access to devices. We still have some variance with regard to access to connectivity at home, but even that's becoming an issue that we feel is much more surmountable than what we've experienced before. We made so much progress in a year and a half that we never thought we could do in 1 year. So of the victories that came out of COVID, access to both technology and connectivity for students was a huge one, even though we still have some growth to do. And probably the most notable thing for me on the topic of technology is our students experience the greatest variance with access to resources like technology at home, not so much in school. And for example, the one-to-one plan that Harford County had been promoting prior to COVID, we wanted devices for every student, but we weren't talking about letting kids take them home. And of course, COVID changed that. And so while there was some variance across schools with regard to access to technology, for students to have access to technology at home is such a huge leap forward. And I would argue, as I said, that's probably our biggest equity leap forward through all of COVID. With health and safety, it's a lot of areas. We've of course spent a great deal of money on PPE and other things to help us with mitigation. But of course, there's also staffing to support custodial work. And many districts are struggling with shortages in that area right now, but we have a lot of money set aside to continue having that ramped up. Virtual instruction, again, Superintendent Chaudhary touched on quite a lot of this. I'd say we grew tremendously in this area. We're all familiar with the research that came out pre-COVID that showed, the general lack of success for virtual instruction. However, as we said, this was such a learning time for school systems. And we also, I think, became better identifying who really benefits most from the virtual. So I think two really important things for us moving forward. We need to keep evaluating any work we do with regard to virtual instruction. And locally, I'm able to have one person specifically focused on program evaluation. That's a key element of our work. The other is ensuring we have the right students in those types of programs. Because we're doing this locally, you know, our plan is to have a very sort of rapid cycle where we're evaluating how kids are doing. If they've signed up for virtual, we're treating it more as a privilege. We want students for whom it's the best fit in there, but it's also really important to us to assess very quickly if a student isn't meeting the expectations in virtual, if they're not logging in, if they're not turning their cameras on, if they're not submitting their assignments, if they're not thriving there, then we're going to make sure we're moving them into more appropriate programming. And so I think just making sure we stay laser focused on the performance of students in those. It's still an important option for us to give our students, but we want to make sure we're doing it in the best way possible. So the last area before I talk about summer school, and this is really a segue to summer school, is the focus on mental health. We have so many new initiatives around this. We actually produced a one-pager in Harford County in, I think, late winter, about maybe, in the winter session of last year. We had 20 to 30 new initiatives around mental health that were going on in our school system. Many of them brand new, some of them just ramping up things we've done in the past. But it was such an important topic, and I think there's so much happening there. I want to highlight a couple of the things. This summer, we actually hired staff to design a standardized mental health needs assessment, and we will be administering that to every elementary and secondary student in the fall. It's designed to standardize at the elementary level and a separate one to standardize for secondary students. And so once we have that completely designed, again, we'll be able to implement it and then use that to help us anticipate additional program we may need for our students. So that's one of the ways we've invested in student mental health. Another, of course, is increasing our training. Two broad areas for training: youth mental health first aid, a really important initiative, and ensuring our folks are better capable of delivering in that area. And then the other is something you may have heard of. The acronym is QPR, which stands for Question, Persuade, Refer. And this is essentially, it's to train both students and adults. And we train our secondary students, or some of our students. We're happy to, we've trained parents. We also train many of our staff members. And this is about how to address students who may be expressing suicidal ideation and concerns related to that. So that's another broad area for training. I just want to highlight one of our, I think, most creative summer school programs. This summer, we were able to offer, it was a small group, but we offered an outdoor adventure camp. We called it Camp Wonder. We have an outdoor education center, Harford Glen, where we do outdoor education for our students during the year. But in this particular case, this summer camp was a sleepover camp for homeless students. We wanted to specifically serve students who were in a homeless situation, just to be able to provide sort of a more engaging and fun activity over the summer. So that was one of the things that was, I think, more interesting that we were able to achieve. So with regard to summer learning, you've heard, I think, a great list of examples from Superintendent Chaudhry's presentation, so I won't repeat. I have a list as well. But generally, I'd say, what we're hearing from superintendents is summer school was successful. In Harford County, we normally serve hundreds of students in summer school in a regular year. This year, we had over 6,200. And so scaling it up is maybe an understatement. I mean, we were 5 to 10 times our normal service in summer school. But it did have there were a range of programs. Some of them were more traditional summer school where students were identified based on need. They were sort of targeted by schools. We reached out to them. We enlisted them to come in. But others were more interest and engagement focused. And so we had other programs where students did more project type work and things that were just meant to be more fun and engaging. So in the area of how we accounted for students' progress in summer school, again, you have some difference. For some of the students who we targeted, it was more about end of year grades and, assessments that were delivered at the beginning of summer school. And in other cases, it was more open enrollment and students were able to come in just to get re-engaged, to focus more on school over the summer and to just not lose some of that momentum. So we had a nice mix. In June and July, I visited all of my 54 schools to sit down with the principals there, and talking about what was going on in summer school was one of the important topics. And I think what many of them said was they all experienced, they acknowledged the fatigue in students, parents, and staff. You know, in many cases, it was hard to enlist students to come in. It was hard to get the families to say, yes, we're going to send my student to school for a little bit longer, even though we had so many kids who really had great needs in that area. But knowing that we have many students who have not, you know, delivered at the level we wanted, you know, they just didn't reach the same achievement levels we would hope for. We've been able to identify those students, but we know that every student we serve this summer is going to, you know, shrink a little bit the to-do list for us going over the next couple of years, because, you know, getting students up to the level we want them following COVID is going to take more than just one summer. And I think our schools are doing a really good job identifying that. We know we'll have a better sense of the accountability in the fall. I think one thing that, you know, superintendents, whenever we talk about accountability in any sort of assessment, you know, assessment in the spring or all through COVID was probably more of an art than a science, because it was hard to know what the results meant, you know, particularly because we had so many kids in virtual settings, not knowing, you know, who was completing assessments, how much help they were getting, who was trying at all. So we've really had to read between the lines in a lot of those assessments. So we are looking forward to a time when we have more controlled environment, you know, when we have our students back in place where we can get a better handle on that. But that said, you know, as is always the case, that our teachers really do have a good sense of where their students stand. And if you talk to individual teachers, they can tell you they know pretty well where their students are, and they know who needs help, and they've been focused on them. So before I close, I just want to touch on a few quick topics. One, all 24 superintendents, you know, we're continuing to focus on our meetings with health directors and constantly reassessing what we need to do to ensure we can keep students in school throughout this next school year. Every decision we make is an effort to try to make sure we have more students in school, and that's so essential for all of us. Second, we are still concerned about enrollment and how that will affect things moving forward in the school years. I've been fortunate to see enrollment beginning to tick back up here, but one thing, we never know exactly what it's going to look like until the warm bodies walk through the door. And so that is something we'll be continually updating, but we know that's something to stay concerned about. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that we are taking the implementation of the blueprint very, very seriously. We see obviously a huge to-do list for school systems. We've worked with MABE, Association of School Boards, to build an implementation advisory board that will include staff from our entities. We'll have reports from the 5 subgroups that will be focusing on each of the policy areas. We're also bringing together the 24 implementation coordinators and charting a course for sharing best practices and troubleshooting and making recommendations, because this is a pretty big lift. But in many ways, the federal funds we're talking about today and what we've begun working with are allowing us to front load some of those blueprint priorities. I know I talked a lot about mental health earlier in my comments. We've been able to ramp up support in areas of mental health, and that of course is a huge priority in the blueprint. There are many other things. One of the things we focus on is the teacher pipeline. Again, I can use some of the funds that we've received in the last year to help get a little bit of a head start in some of the teacher pipeline work, because I think we are really, really concerned about not just the shortage we're in, but seeing that shortage become even more acute over the next few years. So many areas we're working on. I think many questions still to be answered, and as we've all, I think, felt today, we're looking forward to working with Superintendent Chaudhary and his vision for all of Maryland schools, and we want to support in any way we can. So thank you so much for the opportunity to participate today.
Thank you. Again, if there are any questions, please raise your hand. I see one from my committee, Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Bolson, I just had a quick question for you, and you mentioned it in your testimony about assessments. So I know this year is going to be a little unique because we're likely going to have to assess our students twice, once in the fall and then once again in the spring, as sort of the normal course of things. So I'm just sort of curious if there's been any conversation among superintendents about maybe, you know, some sort of a creative approach, because I think one of the concerns I would have is, I mean, obviously we need to assess our students, but, you know, Are they going to want to come back and get assessed again? Are they going to are families going to sort of understand the importance around it? So are there any conversations going on now, sort of in planning for the spring around creative ways to make sure that we don't have a massive drop off, and that, families and students and teachers sort of, understand and are working collectively to get the data that we need?
So I don't think I've been on a call with superintendents where the topic of assessment hasn't come up. It has been a major concern, and looking at some of the challenges we have with assessment, knowing that before going into COVID, Maryland was in a transition there, and COVID just really exacerbated the challenges with that transition. So we know we're in a really tough spot on that front. Again, without speaking for the others on this topic, again, I know they're all focused on it, and I think everyone's looking for the best solution to make sure they get the data they need. For us in Harvard has really been doubling down on our local accountability measures, and I think most districts are doing that. I don't know the degree to which you'd count that creative, but I think everyone is using creative ways to find, what's the best measure we can get for our students. Because in the midst of this, again, in our district, we were looking at really some new strategic initiatives about preparing students for career and college readiness as outlined in the blueprint. We're trying to get ahead of that, and assessment and accountability are going to be a huge part of it. But I can say it's something that superintendents are looking for more. They're very interested in collaborating on this topic. And so anything around this, we want to be part of it.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, we have any Ways and Means members that have? Don't.
We do. You gave us the time. Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for your comments. I have a couple of questions, actually. One is a concern I've heard from some constituents who are educators who are, with the CDC recommendations around masking and several of our school systems announcing, mask requirements for the coming school year. I think the teachers are both relieved and grateful to have that requirement in place, but also I think have some concerns about enforcement and management of that, and sort of wondering what support will administrators provide in terms of helping manage enforcement with students and parents, so that it doesn't interfere with teachers sort of trying to build those positive relationships with the students and parents. Actually, you're still on mute.
For everybody on this, because districts are coming out in different places. In fact, we've not yet announced our position on masking, but of course it's something we've been talking a great deal about, and that will be coming out in the next couple of days. But if I were to attempt to answer for all superintendents, I would say this is something that school systems need to treat like any other disciplinary issue. I think enforcement during this has been hard. Obviously, it's very emotional, because you've heard the testimony from both. I'm sure you've gotten letters from both sides, just as we have, with people very strongly feeling it should be one way or another with regard to this. But the degree to which districts make this required, there has to be enforcement, and there'll have to be support. Again, I mean, the best I can offer is it needs to be treated like other disciplinary infractions. And in most cases, our teachers do a great job of enforcing that in the classroom, but where they need support, the schools really need to be able to step in and be willing to offer that help. So again, I'm not sure I can speak for everybody on that one, but I recognize that is one of the hardest things that is an ongoing discussion.
Did you have a second question, Delegate Feldmark?
Yes, thank you. And so this is actually a concern from some constituents who are parents of preschool students who are too young to receive the vaccine at this point and have other underlying health conditions, type 1 diabetes and some other conditions, who are particularly concerned about the health risks they'll be facing in school, and particularly concerned about what level of increase in health services will be available. A lot of our schools have shared nurses who cover multiple schools, and so are there what can you speak to in terms of sort of stepping up the health services, especially with our youngest students and with other conditions?
Again, not really able to speak for everyone on this and that, but I can say, so one of the things, my particular role, I serve on the Commission for the Advancement of School-Based Health Centers. So advocating for health services in schools is an incredibly important issue for me, particularly. We have school-based health centers in our schools, but we also, in Harford County, are fortunate to have at least one nurse for every school, in some cases more. That being said, our nurses are very, very much overworked right now. And so again, this is one of the places in our federal funds. We're actually going back, when we were beginning our work on our grant funds, and again, I'm saying this mostly because I think this is probably similar across the districts. When we were beginning to develop our grant applications for the new round of federal funds, we had talked about doing more to support. We actually put funds in our budget to support outsourcing more health services to increase just our capacity in that area. We've also been talking about finding a way to reimburse some of our nurses and other health-focused employees because they've been way into overtime for the last 14 months. And I know they're running out of steam quickly. And so those are things that we are doing in our grants, but now with this change with Delta and what we've seen with the latest metrics just going the direction they're going, we're seeing the work placed on them ramping up yet again. So in fact, the last meeting I had prior to this particular hearing was with my student services director to go back and talk about how we may need to revisit that. So again, it's a challenge. I mean, we're all getting ready to press send if we haven't already on those grant applications. But this is an area that as we see, the increased need brought on by Delta and the rising metrics in our districts is something that we know we need to focus on.
Delegate Resnick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to ask this question now because I don't know if I'll be able to stay through the whole hearing for some of the other panelists. We've been talking about masking, distancing, ventilation, et cetera. We've been sort of tippy-toeing around vaccines. And obviously we are going back into the buildings in approximately 20 to 25 days, where half the student population aren't even able to get the vaccine even if they want to. Has there been any discussion about mandating vaccines for teachers the way that the state has moved forward with other state employees in congregate settings? So either mandating or weekly testing. You may have seen just literally minutes ago, news is reporting that California as a state has moved to that model. And so I want to see if there's been any discussion between the superintendents, the school boards, and the Teachers Association about moving to that step so that our kids are protected.
So district by district, I can't speak for the amount of this conversation. Of course, this is a topic that comes up and it has been discussed. The most recent conversations with superintendents I've heard around this has been, we really do see this as something that needs to occur at least a state level. But that being said, it doesn't mean that districts aren't entertaining some of them individually. Obviously, that's a very difficult subject. And I think you would probably find many people in support of the thinking around this, but at the same time, the resistance we're going to see. So is it being discussed? We've been thinking through some of the implications, absolutely. I think like I said, I think there's pretty general agreement among at least the superintendents that we would like to see this be a state initiative. But that being said, conversations are ongoing. But we'll probably be watching what's happening in the news and those other examples you've seen before really any big moves start to occur.
Madam Chair, can I follow up real quick?
Yes.
So I appreciate that. I'm a little disheartened at the notion that this is a difficult subject. We require every one of the hundreds of thousands of children that go into our schools to get vaccinated. We've been doing it for decades. Every single person on this Zoom, when they went into school, were vaccinated against measles, mumps, rubella, and other diseases. This shouldn't be a difficult subject. The vaccine is safe. I'm pretty sure that every single person on this Zoom, if not just about every single person on the Zoom, has received their vaccines. We're all here, right? And we are the safest of all of the folks. Why is this a difficult subject when we require every single kid to be vaccinated for things that they are able to be vaccinated for?
I can answer if you'd like. I mean, regardless of whether, how important it is, and I recognize that this is a very important topic. I mean, there's a lot of people pre-COVID who would have had the same opinion of the flu vaccine, I think. But yet that remained a difficult subject, and one that many entities didn't, weren't willing to take on. So again, would we be willing to engage in this? Do we think it's important? I think we absolutely believe it's important. But I don't think that obviates the fact that it won't be an easy conversation, because we know politically it won't be. But that doesn't mean that it's important.
Okay.
Delegate Ebersol?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a different question, but actually Delegate Resnick brings one to mind. So I think I'm going to go in that direction. He focused mostly on staff, but very soon, I believe the CDC is going to give full approval to this vaccine. And at that time, I want to know if discussions are occurring about mandating vaccines for children who are eligible to be vaccinated to return to school as well, in much the same way that he eventually went and talked about the mumps and rubella for children, not just staff. And how are we having preparatory discussions about our actions in the case that's right now, students who are 12 to 18 can be vaccinated, and if the vaccine is fully approved by the CDC, as those other vaccines are. We're having those discussions right now. And maybe you'd like to tell me how they're going, but I first just like to know yes or no. Are you all talking about that?
Vaccines are constantly discussed, but I would argue that, again, these types of mandates are a topic that we need to be discussing with the health department. I think the health department would need to be taking a lead on this.
But specifically about children being vaccinated, is that being discussed?
I think all of us are looking to find as many ways as possible to encourage students to be vaccinated. I think, again, your superintendents, without speaking for every person, but the sense I've gotten from listening is everyone supports the importance of the vaccine. We see the benefits the vaccine has brought in our ability to deliver instruction in the manner we want. So as I said, we're all, very willing to be a part of this conversation. We discuss it sort of theoretically amongst ourselves, but, has this been a conversation with the health department? It's not an ongoing discussion, but I think that would be something that should be happening.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I couldn't. Delegate Smith, Valentino Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent Bolson, you sparked some interest when you talked about the programming for the homelessness. I'm the House Chair. We have a joint committee and we have several members of that committee on now. And we know that the number of homeless children in the school system had been increasing prior to COVID. And we know that by federal law, the school systems have to have somebody assigned in them that actually follow and structure the needs and assessments of the homeless. And so given the limitations of today's time, what I'd like to do is ask, do the superintendents collectively have the data on the homeless and what is or isn't working with respect to learning, and then invite you to come as we do our interim work with the joint committee so that we can prepare recommendations for the presiding officers on that issue.
I certainly think that's something we can talk more about, and we can, poll the superintendents for those best practices as you've sort of described. And I would also suggest, I know in my school district, our executive director of student services is my absolute expert on this area and tremendously innovative. And so I'd involve him in any conversation we have. There are many resources, but we'd be happy to engage in that. It's an important topic for us.
Thank you. Will be a good follow-up then from the information we learned today, and we'll be in touch with you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much for being here, and know that Both committees are very supportive of our superintendents and look forward to working with you through all the issues that we will all be facing through the fall. So thank you again for your participation. We're now going to hear, you're welcome. We're now going to hear committees from the Maryland State Education Association and from the Baltimore Teachers Union, both. And so if she is with us, we will bring up Cheryl Boost, President of the Maryland State Education Association. And also, we can actually both unions could come up, be ready at the same time. Do your presentation separately, however. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman McIntosh. Good to see you, Chairwoman Kaiser, and the rest of the committee. Wish it was in person, but we are here virtually. I am Cheryl Boast, 4th and 5th grade teacher from Baltimore County, proud to serve as the president of the Maryland State Education Association with 75,000 members plus the largest labor union in the state of Maryland. The past year and a half has been taxing and difficult for many of our students and educators. You can go to the second slide. We were all hoping to be done with the coronavirus, but unfortunately we're not. And in order to reopen our schools for in-person instruction for the 21-22 school year, it is going to take intentional collaborative effort to make sure our students, educators, and communities feel ready, supported, and informed. We must prioritize the health and safety of everyone in our school buildings. And we must ensure that there are adequate and appropriate supports in place to emphasize academic enhancements and provide social emotional supports. I think you've heard that as a common theme with Superintendent Chaudhry and Dr. Bolsom. The Blueprint for Maryland's Future and American Rescue Plan are both historic in their funding, and they present opportunities to not only repair issues caused by the pandemic, but really provide a pathway forward and the tools to cure the inequities that existed prior to COVID-19. I have said throughout this pandemic, and I still do, that a return to normal is not good enough for way too many of our students who are being underserved, especially our Black and Brown students and our students living in poverty. We must really use the opportunity that you gave us to transform our schools. The historic funds can be used to increase our investments in community schools, additional academic supports like tutoring, and support new positions and increase salaries to build and retain our workforce. Next slide, please. I do want to be crystal clear today. There's nothing more our members want than to return to in-person learning this school year. To do that, we must all work together to ensure there are safe and healthy learning and working conditions. Those conditions can be supported and maintained by following CDC and Maryland Health Department guidance, and we recommend a layered approach to mitigate coronavirus transmission. I will discuss some of these steps coming up, but all of these elements are dependent upon our goal is to open our school year in person and stay in person in a safe learning environment. First, consistent and clear communication with educators and parents and students is critical. Our members and parents need to hear updates and be part of decision-making prior to it hitting the media. Many of our schools were sharing things in the media and they never shared it with parents and students and educators. That has to change and a lesson learned moving forward. Next slide, please. When it comes to vaccines, and this gets to Delegate Resnick and Delegate Ebersol's questions, MSEA has been leading the push with our members and in school communities for everyone who is eligible to get vaccinated. It is a critical tool to eliminating the virus. I even recorded a public service announcement this past weekend to make sure people put vaccines on their back to school list. Local school districts and county health departments can collaborate with school employees to expand vaccine distribution actually in our communities and possibly use school sites. Nationally, while 90% of educators are vaccinated, 90%, less than 50% of adults and less than 40% of eligible students are fully vaccinated. We must, as a community as a whole, increase the numbers of those vaccinated to protect our students and meet our goals for a safe and healthy in-person school year. In addition to rigorous mitigation protocols, masking, hand washing, social distancing, ventilation. MSEA and our local affiliates are prepared to work with state and local leaders to develop protocols by which all employees either have proof of vaccination or are subject to frequent coronavirus testing. To answer an earlier question about mandating this vaccine for students, that is in statute. The other current vaccines are in state statute. So that would need a state initiative to make it a requirement for students. But we could use state leadership on the issue of masks as well. Schools should follow the CDC guidance, and that means regardless of vaccine status, everyone should be wearing a mask. The governor has failed to provide leadership on this point for our schools. So we should all send the right message to our school leaders, educators, students, and families that at least right now, with the increased transmission of the Delta variant, it is imperative that we secure our school environments by requiring masks to be worn in schools, period. We just need to say it and enforce it. We also need rigorous and consistent plans related to contact tracing and protocols to report positive cases. And as Delegate Barnes brought up, to utilize earmarked ARP funds to make upgrades to ventilation systems. Next slide, please. There are obviously several challenges to realizing our health and safety goals. Primary among them is the lack of statewide guidance on masking. This failure to date allows for patchwork guidance from local school systems across the state and makes enforcement very difficult for our educators. It's confusing, and without it, we will not stop the spread of the Delta variant. Two other issues that are challenges include staffing shortages, as Dr. Bolson shared, and uncertainty on how leave and absences will be accounted for due to COVID. Shortage in educator staffing is not a new issue, but it's been further exacerbated by the pandemic. Even more specifically, we're in critical need of mental health personnel as we return with a focus on social emotional learning needs. We have to address this shortage. Lastly, there needs to be a plan on leave and policies around quarantine requirements for students and educators. With possible mandatory quarantine periods, how do we address students who may have come in contact with someone who has tested positive while preventing chronic absenteeism and loss of academic learning? How do we address leave policies for educators who may be mandated to quarantine after exposure? We hope these issues can be addressed before school starts. Next slide. But with all the challenges around reopening, there are also opportunities. The blueprint and ARP provide investments in so many areas. You see them here on the slide, and they really are just a part of the story. We are fortunate that the legislature and the Biden administration has such forethought and demonstrated leadership to create these opportunities, and we thank you for passing the blueprint. Beyond the financial investments, there's an opportunity to collaborate with stakeholders in education to work towards a shared goal of a safe return to in-person learning. We have hope and promise with Superintendent Chaudhry and believe we have proven in the past, even today, to be ready and willing partners in solving major challenges. It will take all of us working together and to remain committed to secure the best education for our students. Last slide. Educator voice is sometimes forgotten or ignored or caught up at the end, even on education issues. So we thank you so much for including us and letting our voices be heard today. Thank you to both the Ways and Means and Appropriations Committee. And you see some of our staff who are great legislative staff who are willing and able to answer any questions. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bose. Any questions from either committee? All right. Seeing none, we also have today from the Baltimore Teachers Union, I believe, Diamante Brown, is that correct?
Diamante, thanks for asking.
Oh, I apologize for pronouncing it wrong. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'll get started right away. The first thing that the Baltimore Teachers Union wants everyone to know that we feel is important for a successful return to school is going to be engagement, which has been spoken about. We believe that as we go back to schools, having student, staff, parent, and community voices are going to be really important. We don't think any decision about us should be made without us. And we wanted to give some suggestions on how to improve engagement. Many parents, students, and staff members have asked for joint reopening input and feedback sessions so that it allows for students, staff, and parents and community members to discuss reopening plans at the same time. In the Baltimore City Public School District, oftentimes these discussions were only had with one group represented at one time. So for example, parents would have a parent discussion, students would have a student discussion, staffs talk about it at the staff meeting. But what people want is to be able to speak all at the same time and be in the same space to so that they can hear what different stakeholders are saying about the reopening plans. And also people want to have more opportunities for their feedback and their input to be captured and to feel meaningful. And so we suggest that there are more differentiating structures that are being used to capture feedback. And some examples of differentiating structures that could be used to capture feedback are polls, Google Forms, Jamboard, small groups. We think it's really important that stakeholders are able to generate their own questions instead of districts laying out the questions that they want answered. We do understand that there are certain questions that need to be answered. However, a lot of times stakeholders have questions that go unanswered because they didn't have the opportunity to even bring it up. We also think that stakeholder generated support structures are important. So for example, I am representing the Baltimore Teachers Union, a major stakeholder in reopening Baltimore City Public Schools. And we are giving you right here some ways that you could better support capturing feedback when engaging with the directly impacted individuals. Also, promotion and planning of reopening input and feedback sessions can actually, if it's done well, can increase attendance of more directly impacted stakeholders. And we suggest that our school district, BCPSS, expands how reopening input and feedback sessions are communicated. Right now, we know that many times things are communicated on a BCPSS website, and we appreciate that, but also think that we can expand by flyering the community, because a lot of times people in the community, well, in Baltimore City, in the community that I live in, they don't go to the website. But if you come to their door with a flyer, or if you have something in your hand, or if they can see it at the storefront, they feel like the information is more accessible. Using Baltimore media channels, and also co-planning engagement sessions with the Parent Community Advisory Board, because that gives you access to more parents and community members instantly. So oftentimes the school system does present to the Parent Community Advisory Board, but it probably would improve feedback and input sessions if they were more on the front end. We also believe that proper staffing will be helpful in the return to school buildings. As we reopen schools, we think we have to be very intentional, not just about how we build capacity with staff, but how we utilize staff. And we think that we should be focusing very heavily on staff that focus on engagement and staff that focus on mental health needs. And just in case people aren't really clear on what we mean by mental health and engagement staff, we wanted to give some examples. So we think that as far as mental health staff, we need our social workers, school counselors, school psychiatrists, physical and occupational therapists, and our audiologists, our clinicians. And we also need our student wholeness specialists. I'm not certain if every district has a student wholeness specialist, but Baltimore City Public Schools does. And they are great needs as well as the community and parents' needs. And then also engagement staff like our community school site specialists are going to be very important as we go back into school buildings. Not only do we think that focusing on these staff members to help with our students' mental health and engagement needs are important, but as I said earlier, proper utilization of these staff members are going to be important. So we wanted to give some suggestions. We think that BCPSS district office staff and school-based administrators should collaborate with clinicians and student wholeness specialists so that they can create structures that foster an environment that prioritizes students' social emotional needs. We think that clinicians, student wholeness specialists, community school site specialists, they can help families that may need additional non-academic support as a result of the pandemic. And also our community school site specialists, they're going to be very important on how we re-engage students that are disconnected from BCPSS. And I hope that you can see our theme that we're not just trying to give you the what, we're trying to give you suggestions about the how and hoping that you'll take the directly impacted people's, the teachers and the PSRP's feedback seriously. Lastly, I just want to talk about health and safety in Baltimore City Public Schools. Most of the staff members, parents, and students are would like to see the following and have some concerns about the following. We want everyone masked up, and we would love to make certain that we have sufficient soap and hand sanitizer. We are, of course, very disappointed that this is even still a topic in Baltimore City Public Schools, but unfortunately it is, because even when it's not a pandemic, we don't have sufficient soap in our bathrooms. And now that we are in a pandemic, we're going to need an increased amount of soap and hand sanitizer in our bathrooms. We're happy that our school district was willing to eventually come to some agreement around making certain we have sufficient soap and hand sanitizer, but we would just like some support on making certain that this becomes a reality. We also think that the walkthroughs that we negotiated with, that we agreed upon with Mayor Scott and Dr. Santelises will be important. These walkthroughs really help staff members feel less anxious about entering school buildings. I don't think it's a secret that Baltimore City Public Schools have some of the worst school buildings in the state of Maryland, maybe in the nation. So just having someone go through and check the building and make certain that everything is the way it's supposed to be, or is very, very, very relieving for many staff members. And also COVID testing. One of the things that our district did was made certain that every single staff member in Baltimore City Public Schools that wanted to get vaccinated could get vaccinated, and also made certain that they had a COVID testing program for staff and students. That's going to continue, and we are appreciative that our district thinks that it's important for it to continue. And with that said, we just want to thank you all for inviting us here. Our contact information is on the last page. Feel free to just email me directly at dbrown@baltu.org. And we try to keep our website as updated as possible so you can learn more information about the concerns and events that are going on in the Baltimore Teachers Union.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Brown.
And I believe, yeah, you have a.
Sorry about that.
You have a, that's okay.
Delegate
Go ahead.
Patterson, go ahead with the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. The question is for Ms. Bost. I may have missed it, but in listening to some of the teachers in my district, they have concerns about their safety, et cetera. And I know that there's been a report about mental health support for for students. My question is, are you aware of, are you proposing mental health for teachers?
We absolutely are seeing more and more trauma and needs by our educators. Everyone, front office secretaries, bus drivers. And so we do need additional supports for not only students, but employees when it comes to social, emotional, and mental health. What we do have with our insurances are employee assistance programs, but seats are so limited. Appointments are hard to schedule, not only as we see for families, but also for our employees. So it is a great need that exists in our system.
All right, thank you. But how is it being addressed? Is it just citing there's a greater need? Is there a venue, a way in which it can be addressed in preparation for the potential cases that may emerge?
Right now, what I'm hearing is some of our local associations are trying to get in through negotiations types of leave to cover some of these mental health occurrences and how folks are feeling. But that is also leading to our teacher shortage as well, is because people are just getting out. And so right now it's through negotiations that some of our districts are trying to do that, but the mental health supports are just very far and few between. But it is a concern. I'm not sure if I have the exact answer or any of our locals do, but some of it is through leave, even lower class sizes. All of those can help protect the mental health and workload of our teachers and all of our educators.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ways and Means or Appropriations? We have Vice Chair Chang in charge of Appropriations now. Any other questions? Delegate Smith.
Sorry, I could not find the appropriate piece to lift up my virtual hand, so I want to apologize for that. And I also want to apologize that I had to step away for a work obligation and I'm back. So I'm glad that I saw the beginning presentation and can conclude with Ms. Brown with BTU. I just wanted to lift up that because I'm a parent of children under 12, obviously they're not eligible for any vaccinations. And the macro issue is obviously that we kept children at home largely to protect older people and adults. And now at this moment, the people that really have no medical option to prevent, transmission, they're really depending on all adults to kind of make the same kind of sacrifices they were asked to do with a component of their childhood that they can't get back. So I just wanted to know, I think I heard that perhaps MSEA is supportive of vaccine mandates for educators. I didn't know if BTU had spoken to that because I came late.
No, I didn't speak to that. We have yet to survey our members about vaccine mandates. That's something that we'll be doing moving forward. You know that we have we stress very strongly about membership-led decisions, and so we just have to wait until we hear what how our membership feels about vaccine mandates, and once we know how they feel about vaccine mandates, then we'll be able to report out. And we haven't surveyed our members about vaccine mandates prior to now because it wasn't a concern that was brought up in our membership. And we try to drive our what we do based on the directly impacted our members. But now that people are asking us, my members they still really haven't brought it up. Well, all they want to know is the district going to mandate us to get vaccines or not? And earlier it was, if I want to get a vaccine, are y'all gonna let me get a vaccine? And then we had people that were saying, are y'all gonna make me get a vaccine? Or if I don't want it, all of that stuff. So the same way we surveyed our members in the beginning about if they wanted us to work with BCPS to get them access to the vaccine is the same way we will have engage our members in surveying and input sessions around how they feel about vaccine mandates. And then we'll be able to confidently say how our membership feels about it. And if for some reason our membership is too split on the situation, we will say that we won't take a position on it. And I know that a lot of times things are like, well, whatever the leader wants to do, you need to just do it. And you need to tell your membership. I've gotten several calls. That's just not how I run my ship. And, so once I have input from my members, I report out.
I appreciate that. As a Baltimore City Schools parent, and also the fact kids don't really have a membership to appeal to about the fact that they're the only people who can't get vaccinated. I mean, they're literally, a year and a half later, the game has changed. Like literally my child, other people under 12, they've had to sit in the house to protect adults. And now all we're asking is adults to put something on the line for them. And it just feels like it's not equal. And they obviously don't have the political, social, or any other voice to assert themselves. And it's literally a matter of life or death. So I just want to say confidently in my personal capacity, I feel very strongly that every adult that comes in contact with children should be putting their safety first, just as we put adult safety first a year ago. So I just wanted to share that, and please feel free to transmit that to your membership as well.
Yes, and we try not to do things in silos because, like I said, we always want to talk to the directly impacted, and we're not the only ones directly impacted. Our students and parents are. So we'll also be surveying students and parents to see what their concerns are and how they want them addressed. A lot of times there's issues and society has already decided how to address the issue. And we try, instead of just placing what the issue is and what the solution is on directly impacted individuals, and allowing them to tell us what the issue is and what they want the solution to be. And if that's in line with what everyone else is saying, then we're going to do what the directly impacted individuals are guiding us to do. But we must talk to them first. We can't just make decisions based off of the loudest perspectives where we hear in the room.
Chairwoman Kaiser, can I clarify one item?
Sure.
Just because the word mandate is defined many, many different ways throughout this country right now. And we were just when we want to make clear that we support the districts having that conversation to have proof of vaccination. And if you're not vaccinated, to have frequent testing. That's the federal definition of the mandate. And we are open to that having those discussions at our local levels. I just wanted to be clear. And thank you, Delegate Smith, for everything that you do.
From the Appropriations Committee, we have a question from the Chairman of the Education and Economic Development Subcommittee, Chairman Barnes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, I missed, when is your survey going out? Or when did it go out?
It didn't go out, and I don't have a date of when that's going out.
Well, the clock's ticking, so I think maybe it's time to get that survey out. I mean, school starts in a month, so I don't know why we would delay that. It's an important issue. I got kids going to public schools, 100% with Delegate Smith. They can't get vaccinated, so let's make sure the adults who can do to protect our kids. So let us know, please get back to us when you be getting that survey out. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? I guess I want to thank you all very much. I want to thank Chaudhary and make sure all of our members learn how to pronounce his name, Dr. Chaudhary, and thank Dr. From our Harford County Superintendent, as well as our two union representatives here today. And say goodbye to all of our members, and thank you to the staff for helping us out today. All right, take care, everyone.